Well, folks, it's official. Universal Orlando has confirmed and announced that Hollywood Rip Ride Rockit will be seeing its last rides in September of this year. And before you get upset, let me tell you folks, this ride's time was absolutely up. It's approaching 15 years of operation, which was around the mark that Incredible Hulk was torn down and rebuilt, and around the time that Dueling Dragons was torn down for good. So yeah, timing seems to match up with Universal's other outdoor roller coasters. Plus, this was a notorious mechanical disaster for Universal. They had to invest millions of dollars in this thing to keep it in tip-top shape. It was a nightmare for them to deal with. Not to mention, too, that a lot of people found it to be rather rough. I never found it to be rough, but some people certainly did report that. And to top it all off, a ride that was about listening to music while riding the ride went ahead and cut the song list from 30 songs down to 6. So yeah, I think it was about dang time that this ride shuttered its doors for good. So with Hollywood Rip Ride Rockit being next up on the chopping block for Universal, the question now becomes, what's going to replace it? Well, we already have half the answer here, as through permits, we know that an Intamin roller coaster will be coming to Universal Orlando in the near future. Obviously, more than likely going in this location. And I mean, this is not really surprising whatsoever, as when you look at Rip Ride Rockit's plot of land that it takes up, it's a very narrow strip of land, and realistically, you were never going to put anything else in there other than a roller coaster. Either they were going to get rid of Rip Ride Rockit and not replace it with anything, or it was going to be a roller coaster. There was really never any other option. And what I also have to say is not particularly surprising is the fact that Universal is rocking with the roller coaster manufacturer Intamin once again. After all, Intamin has sort of been their partner in crime for a number of years now. I mean, they worked together on Hagrid's Magical Creature Motorbike Adventure. They worked together on VelociCoaster, and they're working together once again for Epic Universe with the How to Train Your Dragon roller coaster. Clearly, when Intamin and Universal work together, it's nothing but magic. I mean, they just produce nothing but winners, folks, and it's no surprise that Universal want to work with them once again for this new roller coaster here. And it is that connection that has led people to believe that the replacement for Hollywood Rip Ride Rockit will be a Fast and Furious Drift roller coaster, as currently Universal and Intamin are working on a very similar roller coaster over in Hollywood. In 2026, Fast and Furious Hollywood Drift will be opening at Universal Studios Hollywood, and this coaster looks like it's going to be sort of like the VelociCoaster of that park, in the sense that it's going to have high intensity thrills, it's going to have some high speed launches, and it's going to have a very unique mechanic where the coasters are going to sort of tilt on the track. Think something similar to Guardians of the Galaxy Cosmic Rewind in that regard. Now, there's a few reasons why this makes a whole lot of sense. After all, I mean, Universal is no stranger to bringing clones to both of these parks. Both parks have Transformers. Both parks have Simpsons. Both parks have Forbidden Journey. And the list goes on and on. Universal loves to bring rides to both resorts. And it makes sense. I mean, they're on different sides of the country. There are very few people who are visiting both parks, realistically. However, this is a very special case because unlike those where Universal can pretty much make the exact same ride on both coasts, Universal will not be able to replicate Fast and Furious Hollywood Drift here in Orlando. The reason being is because that ride was very much so tailor-made for Hollywood. You see, this ride is being built on the cliffside between Universal Hollywood's upper and lower lots, and is even being built around the Starway escalators that get you between the two lots. It is a very specific build. It's a very tedious and difficult build, which is why it's taking all the way until 2026, despite the fact they started construction on this quite a long time ago at this point. And it's also why we won't be getting a one-for-one clone of this ride in Orlando. Yes, it might be a Fast and Furious themed roller coaster. Yes, it might be a drift roller coaster, but will not have the same layout of the ride in Hollywood. But let me tell you right now, folks, the fact that this is not going to be an exact clone does not by any means disqualify it from coming to Universal Studios Florida. Revenge of the Mummy, for instance, over in Hollywood, and of course in Orlando, and also in Singapore, has completely different layouts in all three of them. Make no mistake, folks, if Universal thinks that this is the best option to go in this spot, they're gonna make it work, even if it ends up being nothing like the version in Hollywood. But that's the thing. Is this actually the best fit for Universal Studios Florida? I mean, sure, for one, obviously, it's got the backing of the brand. It's got the backing of Fast and Furious, one of the biggest media franchises, really, period, in the modern age. And it happens to be owned completely by Universal. These are all Universal films. So, of course, Universal wants to feature Fast and Furious prominently in the parks. The only problem is that, of course, you might be thinking, well, hey, there's already a Fast and Furious ride in this park as it stands today in Fast and Furious Supercharged. The problem with that ride, of course, is that, well, it's not very good. Yeah, and even though the media property that it's based on is super popular, unbelievably popular, quite frankly, the ride itself gets very little foot traffic. In fact, it's probably one of the least trafficked attractions in the entire park. But with that being the case, I sort of have no doubts at this point that it's more than likely that Fast and Furious Supercharged will be closed by the end of the decade. And if that's the case, then either one, if this coaster were to be built, the two rides would be standing at the same time for a very short period of time, or they wouldn't be standing together at all. They would never be operating at the same time. It's very possible that we would never have two Fast and Furious attractions in this park. Though, that's the other sort of kicker here, is that Fast and Furious, I mean, this is a billion-dollar franchise, multi-billion-dollar franchise, mind you. Even though the main line of Fast and Furious films is coming to an end with this next one, we know there are going to continue to be more and more spin-offs of the series going forward. Universal is not letting it die, and for good reason. But that sort of makes me wonder if this is the right vehicle for Fast and Furious in this park. Sure, I think that this sort of ride and roller coaster makes sense in Hollywood, where they're strapped on space and there's only so many rides that can fit into the park, and there's only so much they could do. But for Universal in Orlando, that's not really the case, especially with the addition of the Epic Universe plot of land. Now all of a sudden, Universal's got a whole lot more land to work with that they previously didn't have access to, and they now have backstage areas at the existing Universal parks that have now become open and available. And it really makes me wonder if what would ultimately be a relatively unthemed roller coaster for Fast and Furious, would that be the right outlet to go ahead and promote this franchise and really have it be heavily featured in the park? I mean, as far as theming on this ride goes, it's likely just going to be mainly the queue and maybe a pre-show, and that's going to be about it. There's probably not going to be much of any theming elements in the ride experience itself, other than maybe a dark ride element at the very beginning and a dark ride element at the end. But even then, how much Fast and Furious are going to be able to inject in this ride to the point where it would actually be meaningful? The point in attaching Fast and Furious to this would be to ultimately get people to become Fast and Furious fans, to get them to watch the movies, to get them to buy the merchandise in the gift shop. We know that Fast and Furious Supercharged is not succeeding in doing this because the ride sucks. It actually makes people hate Fast and Furious by the time they get off of it. They're like, wow, that was so bad. I don't want to do anything with Fast and Furious the rest of my life after experiencing that, right? It's having the opposite effect. Would this ride have any effect though, right? If it's highly unthemed, right? If it's largely just sort of a good roller coaster and that's really it, and there isn't that much going on as far as Fast and Furious theming goes or storytelling, is it doing enough to push the franchise in the way that Universal wants it to? I'm not convinced it does. And I'm sort of under the impression at this point that Universal may have grander plans for Fast and Furious. Perhaps multiple attractions, perhaps something that's way more highly themed and in depth for Fast and Furious, something that isn't so simple as a roller coaster. Maybe Universal still does go this route, as after all, again, if the coaster itself is good, it's a win, right? You don't have to worry about if your theming is good, if your dark ride elements are good, if the screens are working, like, no. Right, if it's a good roller coaster, it's going to be a popular ride regardless of the media franchise attached. So it would give you a win for Fast and Furious after, the disaster that was Supercharged, sure. But I really do feel like there's more that could be done with Fast and Furious. And I think we kind of forget this sometimes because, of course, Supercharged is so bad, we kind of forget that, oh yeah, the media franchise that this is based on actually does have a lot of potential for theme park rides. It's just that, they failed epically at delivering that. So to be quite frank, I think that the Hollywood Drift coaster idea is a perfect way to integrate Fast and Furious more into Universal Studios Hollywood. I don't think it's the right avenue for Orlando when they have more space to work with and there could be much grander ideas executed for Fast and Furious than a largely unthemed roller coaster. And I think there are better IPs that can go into this space that don't necessarily need super high levels of theming to sort of convey what makes those properties so special. And I think that one that's maybe something we should consider is, and I know you're going to hate this, going from one that maybe you really like to one you maybe really hate, is what about another Despicable Me attraction, huh? Who's with me? No, of course, nobody's with me, but I mean, think about the location. Rip Ride Rockit's entrance is right next to Minions Land. It basically is in Minions Land, so is it impossible for us to see a Minions roller coaster come in this spot? After all, roller coasters are somewhat fairly tied to the Despicable Me brand. I mean, the first movie, they ride a roller coaster. It's tied to that Pharrell Williams song. And even in the Minion Mayhem ride, at the end, there is a roller coaster. So roller coasters are all over this property. I mean, it's very much so part of its DNA. But I think you can all breathe a sigh of relief because permits have also revealed to us that they are building 2 new show buildings over in the New York section. One that's going to be taking over part of the Jimmy Fallon extended queue and the old Ghostbusters firehouse facade that currently Rip Ride Rockit runs through. And there's going to be a new building built a bit further back in the employee parking lot. Given the location of these buildings, I think it's safe to say that the entrance for this ride will be in New York and not where Rip Ride Rockit's current entrance is, meaning it would not be a part of Minions Land, so you don't have to worry about another Minions attraction coming to this park. You can go ahead and wipe the sweat off your brow, folks. Nothing to worry about here. But speaking of the Ghostbusters firehouse facade, do we think it's at all possible that Ghostbusters could be returning to the parks in this attraction? I mean, if you've been in tune to what's been going on at the Universal Orlando parks over the past year, then you will have noticed that in Studios Florida specifically, Ghostbusters has been getting a massive push. It was one of the 4 core pillars of this summer's tribute store. It was also one of the main features of the Mega Movie Parade, and it also had a Halloween Horror Nights house for the second time in its history. It was a big year for Ghostbusters in the park, no doubt about it, and I don't think that was a mistake, by the way. I don't think that Universal just did that on accident. I think that Universal was very much so intentionally bringing Ghostbusters back in a big way to test it with in-park audiences and to see just how popular it is with the general public. With the idea behind this test, of course, being that if it passed, then it would have enough reason, it would have enough cause to be brought back for a permanent attraction. And in this case, it would not be like the former attraction, which was, of course, a show, a special effects show that was very neat and very cool. Instead, it would be a roller coaster, likely a roller coaster themed to the Ecto-1, probably being called the Ecto Coaster. We know Universal loves names like that, like VelociCoaster and Troller Coaster, so why not add Ecto Coaster to the bunch, rebuilding and refurbishing and recreating the Ghostbusters firehouse facade as the entrance to this attraction, and having the theme of driving around in the Ecto-1 through New York and chasing down ghosts. Have the Ghostbusters theme song blaring throughout the ride, and because we're dealing with ghosts, I think a lot of the ride could probably get away with just being an outdoor roller coaster with no theming, because, you know, they're ghosts, they could be invisible, we don't necessarily have to see them at all times for it to work. And you can have some cool dark ride elements that use that Pepper's ghost effect to have ghosts appear like they're actually, you know, transparent and translucent. So there's potential. There's potential for a great ride here, absolutely. The question is, did Ghostbusters pass this test? Did they pass the test necessary to get themselves another permanent attraction in this park? And let me tell you, folks, obviously, Universal, they hold all the cards here. They have all the data. We don't know for sure, but I could tell you with some pretty good confidence, folks, you're going to love this, that Ghostbusters is a failure. Yeah, sorry, folks. I'm sorry. I think it failed the test. That's just my opinion. I mean, listen, when we talk about the Mega Movie Parade, when we talk about the tribute store, yes, Ghostbusters was a major part of it, but you want to know who really took the spotlight? You want to know what parts of it were really getting talked about? It was Jaws. It was Back to the Future. Heck, even E.T. and Jurassic Park, which had smaller features in these things, were getting more attention than Ghostbusters in many cases. And you want to talk about the Halloween Horror Nights house? It wasn't even the most popular house at the event. Far from it, in fact. Many of the original IP houses actually were just as popular as it. It really was not attracting crowds in the same way that the first Ghostbusters house did back in 2019, which is concerning because what it might represent is a fall off of interest in the franchise. And I mean, this is proven through the actual films that are being put out into theaters. Back in 2016, Ghostbusters, just titled Ghostbusters 2016, that was notoriously a flop, correct? That movie made well over $200 million, but it was also on a fairly fat budget, so it almost certainly lost money, absolutely. But then, in 2021, you had sort of a soft reboot with Ghostbusters Afterlife. That actually made less money at the box office than 2016, but it was made on a much smarter budget. So it was actually kind of seen as a success, especially considering that it did well, relatively speaking, in 2021, which was seen as a very down market for the movie theaters. People weren't returning because of COVID and stuff like that. So it was hard to get people to come back to theaters, and the fact that Ghostbusters kind of did well in spite of that, it was seen as a win, even though it actually had made less than the previous film. And then that brings us to 2024 with Frozen Empire, of course, the movie that the HHN house was based on. And that movie made about the same amount as Afterlife, despite the fact that theaters have now gotten more people coming back because COVID is long gone, and the theater business is doing better than it had in 2021. And it also had a much bigger budget than the original film. So clearly, things are not going in the right direction for Ghostbusters whatsoever. So honestly, I'm not really seeing where Ghostbuster fits the picture. I think it failed in park. I think it failed out of the park. And when you throw on top of this the fact that it's not even a Universal property, it's owned by Sony. So if Universal were to build a permanent attraction, they'd have to pay licensing fees to Sony. They'd have to pay a percentage on merchandise to Sony. I don't really see where the win here is for Universal in bringing Ghostbusters back. It doesn't make any sense to me. And quite frankly, I don't think that it's the winner here. I mean, if it does, hey, maybe we get a good attraction out of it, but I sort of doubt that this is the answer here. But on the note of old attractions getting tested in the park, one of those is Back to the Future. I mentioned it earlier. It was a part of the Mega Movie Parade and of the Summer Tribute Store. But Back to the Future has really been getting tested even before that. I mean, of course, the DeLorean and the train from Back to the Future Part 3 have been a part of the park ever since Back to the Future the ride closed. Not to mention, too, that Doc Brown is still a meet and greet character in the park. So Universal already has an idea of just how popular Back to the Future is with current park visitors. And even though there are no new movies coming out for Back to the Future, there is a new Back to the Future musical that has become fairly popular since its inception, and it's fairly new up to this point as well. So that could continue to sort of steamroll and snowball into something bigger over time as well to kind of build up the Back to the Future brand. But even without that, I do think that it's sort of proven over time to be this sort of timeless classic. I tell you, when I was last at the park, Doc Brown had a whole bunch of people following around, waiting in line to get a picture. He was very popular. And every single time I pass the DeLorean, there's always at least one person taking a picture with it. So I do think that Back to the Future might have some legs on it. And I don't think there's any doubt about it that it would create a great roller coaster attraction in this park. I mean, of course, the idea of sitting in the DeLorean, of course, the roller coaster has to be the DeLorean. It has to be some sort of makeshift DeLorean, obviously. And the idea would be that you start with your launch, you go from 0 to 88 miles per hour. Obviously, you're not actually going 88 miles per hour. Keep in mind, 88 miles per hour is extremely fast. That'd be faster than any ride currently at Universal. There's no chance in a bucket of stack that they're going to go ahead and send you 88 miles per hour on this thing. No chance. However, Universal could always say you're going 88 miles per hour when you're actually going maybe like 60, right? I think that would probably be fine. I think they could probably get away with it, right? It's theming. It's theming. It's not lying. It's theming. And I also think that maybe something that they could do on this ride to kind of make it work would be having tunnels. Think about like on the Incredicoaster over in California Adventure, perhaps having tunnels that have different time periods in them. So think about maybe you go to the dinosaurs and you go through medieval times and all this other stuff. So that way it's like you're jumping through different time periods as you're going around on this roller coaster without having to have huge giant set pieces or dark ride elements, right? You could just have maybe one or two big dark ride scenes, but then have these moments throughout the rides to kind of keep the theming of Back to the Future and time travel alive throughout the attraction. And I think you're on top of this, the narration of Doc Brown throughout the experience. Think about similar to Hagrid, how we have Hagrid talking throughout the entire ride. I think you could have Doc Brown talking throughout the entire ride. Of course, Christopher Lloyd still kicking it. I think he would have no problem coming back as Doc Brown. I think he'd be overjoyed to, if anything, even if it's just through the voice and you don't have him on screen for a pre-show or whatever. I think it's either way, it's totally fine. I think he would absolutely come back. I think he'd absolutely do a great job. And I think it'd be a great way to sort of cement the legacy of Back to the Future and continue to build its popularity with younger and newer audiences as time goes on to kind of keep the franchise alive, especially considering that it's not getting any new media outside of the theme parks. But you want to talk about a property that is getting new media and is extremely popular? Well, you gotta talk about Beetlejuice. You gotta talk about him. I mean, of course, he has been a mainstay in Universal Studios Florida since day one. Of course, he previously had the Beetlejuice Graveyard Review, which was taken out for the Fast and Furious Supercharged queue. Not even the ride, just for the line. It was taken out for the line. That is, man, that's brutal. But despite this, Beetlejuice has remained a very popular meet and greet character throughout the parks ever since. And unlike Ghostbusters, that popularity has transcended elsewhere, as of course Beetlejuice had its first new movie in a long time with Beetlejuice that made almost $450 million worldwide. It was really a smash hit given what it was expected to make. And it's kind of funny to think that this one movie made more than both of the previous Ghostbusters movies combined. So, you want to talk about going with a third-party property, a property that Universal themselves does not own, but is still intrinsically tied to the Universal Studios brand? Hey, Beetlejuice seems like a way better option than Ghostbusters at this point. Not to mention, too, that Beetlejuice is popular even beyond the film. Of course, they've also proven to be popular on Broadway with Beetlejuice the Musical. The bottom line is this, folks, that Beetlejuice has proven to be popular in several different avenues, both in the park, in film, and through the theater. So I don't think there's any doubt about it that Beetlejuice has proven its popularity across several different demographics, through several different mediums, and I don't think that it makes any sense for Universal to continue holding back on bringing Beetlejuice back for a permanent attraction, even though it's not a Universal property and it is a third-party property that they would have to pay licensing fees for. I do think that Beetlejuice has proven its worth in being worth paying up that extra dollar to go ahead and bring a permanent attraction for him to the park. He's proven time and time again just how popular he is. So I think it's long overdue that we go ahead and get him in here. And I think that this could be the avenue to do it with a perhaps sort of like underworld, topsy-turvy sort of roller coaster theme to Beetlejuice, where basically he's more or less torturing you on this coaster, something on those lines. Now, though Beetlejuice was a success at the box office, if we want to talk about box office smash hits, well, we very well can't ignore Wicked. As far as box office gross goes, I mean, Wicked just blew Beetlejuice out of the water. It made nearly $700 million at the worldwide box office. And I've seen a lot of people try to undermine the success of Wicked, saying, oh, well, it didn't get to $1 billion, therefore it's not actually that big of a deal. But folks, you have to keep in mind that most movies that crack $1 billion at the worldwide box office do it primarily off of international box office grosses. Whereas Wicked, though yes, not $1 billion movie, did make a disgusting amount at the domestic box office, which is the United States and Canada, which, let's be honest, folks, is the primary audience for the Universal parks here in the US. Yes, they do pull visitors from the UK and from South America and elsewhere, but really, those are the primary audiences for these theme parks. So seeing a movie do tremendously well at the domestic box office is much more valuable than a movie that cracks $1 billion, but 75% of that gross came from international audiences. And when I say that Wicked did well at the domestic box office, I may be underselling it, because you look at that number, I mean, it made more in the domestic box office alone than Beetlejuice made worldwide, so that's already pretty impressive. But it doesn't even end there. If you go and look at Universal Pictures as a whole and their box office performance over the last 30 years, adjusted for inflation, Wicked is in the top 10 box office performers in the domestic market. That's absurd. It has made more money in the domestic market than any Fast and Furious movie adjusted for inflation. That is absurd. Also keep in mind that it's outgrossed every single Despicable Me movie with the exception of Despicable Me 2, which came out over a decade ago. So yeah, I mean, are we really going to sit here and say that Wicked is not a large enough success to warrant a permanent presence here in the parks? I think it clearly does. And I mean, why not strike when the iron's hot and get a ride in place as soon as possible, using this opportunity of Rip Ride Rockit closing to go ahead and put in a Wicked roller coaster. And I mean, Wicked provides the bones to create a good roller coaster. I mean, I'm sure you can imagine that, you know, it probably would be a pretty good ride listening to Defying Gravity while going on this ride. We could probably have some element with the hot air balloon that the wizard uses, obviously, that, you know, we can go ahead and implement into this ride. The flying monkeys could probably be a big part of it, right? There's a number of different elements that could definitely be injected into this ride to make something that, you know, could easily enough give you some goosebumps for sure. But I think the other great kicker about this is the fact that, yes, this ride would be taking place in the New York section of this park, which is perfect for Wicked because, yes, it's a fantasy film that takes place in the land of Oz, but that's totally okay because Wicked, as a Broadway musical, has ties to New York. So it's easy enough for the facade of this attraction to just be Broadway and to be the entrance to the Wicked play, and then you actually end up entering the world of Wicked. I mean, it's a perfect transition and a perfect way to put Wicked into this part of the park. Sounds pretty perfect, right? Well, maybe it's a little too perfect. I mean, I think there are a couple caveats here. I mean, for one, is the timing. Yes, I did say that Universal would like to strike while the iron's hot, but I do have to wonder, have they had the time to develop a Wicked attraction? Sure, we know that Universal was banking on the success of this movie. I mean, they invested a ton of money into it from a production budget standpoint. They definitely put a lot of a marketing budget behind this thing for sure. And we know that they, at the very least, had developed a gift shop for Universal Studios Florida, which did open shortly after the movie debuted. So clearly they did have some ideas in mind for what to do with Wicked prior to the movie debuting in regards to the parks. But were they developing a ride for Wicked already that soon? I'm not sure they would. Now, it wouldn't be the first time they've done this. I mean, Jurassic Park The Ride over in Universal Studios Hollywood, they were developing that attraction before the movie had actually debuted, which allowed them to have the ride open 3 years after the movie came out. And that wouldn't have been possible had it not been for them starting development on that project when they did. So it's possible that Universal, maybe banking on the success of Wicked, did already start developing ride ideas and concepts for Wicked even before the movie debuted. However, here's the kicker. Would that ride concept be a roller coaster? Sure, we already kind of explained how a Wicked roller coaster could, make for a good ride, but does it really match with the brand image? Does a high-speed, high-intensity roller coaster really match up with what we would expect from a Wicked attraction? To me, personally, probably not. I would expect something a little more family-friendly. No, now, sure, I'm not expecting something that is family-friendly, but I think something more family-friendly, something more inclusive would make sense for Wicked. Maybe a stage show, maybe a dark ride, maybe a screen-based attraction, but certainly something that more or less the whole family can enjoy with limited, exclusions. So do I think we're getting a Wicked attraction in the future? I think that given the success of it in the domestic box office, it's pretty much a surefire thing that's going to happen at some point. I mean, this is a Universal-owned film, too. I mean, how could it not? I mean, I don't really even care about the restrictions with The Wizard of Oz and who owns what and what Universal can use. It doesn't really matter. Maybe that matters more if they're building a land, but as far as an individual attraction goes, I think it's a surefire thing that we will be seeing a Wicked attraction at some point in the future. But as far as Wicked coming here and replacing Rip Ride Rockit as a roller coaster, I just don't think the timing matches up. I just don't think that a roller coaster is the right fit for Wicked. So I think that perhaps Wicked will be on hold for now and won't come here, but will certainly come to the parks at some point in the future. So certainly, folks, those are your main options. These are the most likely contenders to replace Rip Ride Rockit. We know it's going to be a roller coaster. We know it's going to be an intimate roller coaster, which means it's probably going to be pretty good. But we just don't know what property it's going to be themed to. And certainly, it could be something that I haven't considered that isn't on this list. So please, please, please let me know in the comments what you think is going to replace Hollywood Rip Ride Rockit. And if you want to hear me talk about the future of Universal Studios Florida, at least when it comes to Diagon Alley, go ahead and click the video in your screen right now. And I'll see you all next time. Peace.